It's the 80s. No, not those 80s. The 1880s. And over on the east coast of Australia, the sugar industry is booming. The environment is perfect for growing huge amounts of sugarcane, and the massive and continually growing demand for sugar both domestically and internationally means that the farmers growing sugarcane are making some serious bank. There's just one problem though, a native insect known as the cane beetle. This beetle devours the leaves of the sugarcane, stunting its growth, and its larvae hatch underground, eating at the roots of the plant, often killing it. As more and more sugarcane was grown to match the increasing demand, cane beetle populations exploded. Left unchecked, these beetles could seriously reduce potential harvest from a field, and in extreme cases even result in a complete crop failure. Now, cane beetles are tough motherfuckers. The adults have very thick exoskeletons and the eggs and larvae are buried deep underground, meaning that both the young and adult cane beetles have few natural predators, and making efforts to eradicate them extremely difficult and time-consuming. This was a serious problem for the farmers, and as the sugar industry in the state of Queensland continued to grow, their influence over politicians did too. Eventually, by 1900, the state government was lobbied by the Queensland sugar industry and established the Queensland Bureau of Sugar Experiment Stations. They were tasked with coming up with a solution to this cane beetle problem. But, unfortunately for them, the cane beetle was no pushover. And by 1935, there was still no effective solution to this cane beetle problem. Every method they came up with was either too expensive or caused too much damage to other species to ever see practical use. Here enters a man named Reginald Montgomery. He has a great idea on how to solve this cane beetle problem. He proposed the introduction of the cane toad, to prey on the cane beetles. Cane toads had reportedly solved similar issues in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, so surely that success could be replicated here in Australia. And while he couldn't have known it at the time, Reginald Montgomery had just set in motion one of the worst pest control strategies in all of history. One that would cause massive environmental damage, cost huge amounts of resources and funding, and ultimately do nothing to actually reduce the cane beetle population. Before we talk more about their invasion of Australia, let's talk about the toads themselves. Native to Central America, the toads are old. Existing as a species since at least the Miocene, roughly 20 million years or so ago, they've survived this long due to being incredibly effective creatures. Cane toads are big, tough, and mean. Growing as large as 24 centimeters, 9.4 inches for those of you who have terrible choice in units of measurement, they have a thick, leathery skin that's toxic to most animals, and they have large parotoid glands which sit behind the eyes and along its back. These glands secrete highly poisonous bufotoxin. To me, it just looks like he's got a bad case of acne. And apparently, bufotenin, one of the chemicals that the toad excretes, is classified as a Schedule 9 drug under Australian law, putting it in the same category as heroin and LSD. What the fuck? But anyway, this means the toad has very few predators, and its omnivorous diet, along with its highly effective digestive system, means it's capable of eating a wide range of plants, animals, and insects, as well as scavenging for food off of corpses or even in human rubbish. Perhaps even more important to the cane toad's incredible success, however, is its reproductive ability. Female toads lay tens of thousands of eggs at a time, and while only roughly 0.5% of those will reach adulthood, this is a huge number considering this process is repeated all year round. Now, while the cane toad is an incredibly effective species, in its native environment of Central America, many other species have naturally evolved over time to prey on the toads in spite of all of the difficulties. This keeps the cane toad's population in check, preventing them from getting out of control and wreaking havoc on the environment. What Reginald Montgomery spectacularly failed to consider when proposing the introduction of toads to Australia was that none of these predators would exist in the local environment. So, why did Reginald think the cane toad was the perfect solution to Australia's cane beetle problem? Well, the answer is that this strategy had worked before. Puerto Rico had been in the exact same situation as Australia, with beetle infestations causing massive damage to their own sugarcane plantations. and introducing the cane toad over there had done wonders to curb these beetle populations. But just because it had worked in Puerto Rico, did not mean it was going to work exactly the same in Australia. Both the environment and native species were completely different, which should make it fucking obvious to anyone that things weren't going to play out the same way. Anyone except for Reginald Montgomery and the Queensland Bureau of Sugar Experiment Stations, apparently. Not everyone was dumb enough to blindly support the decision to introduce the cane toad to Australia, however, and many saw the obvious ecological disaster looming and spoke out against it. Walter Froggatt was one of them. A well-respected Australian entomologist at the time, he warned that
"This great toad, immune from enemies, omnivorous in its habits, and breeding all year round, may become as great a pest as the rabbit or cactus."
And Walter was of course completely correct. I mean, the man literally has frog in the name, he's clearly an expert. But the Queensland Bureau of Sugar Experiment Stations was desperate for a solution. Decades had gone by without an effective method for controlling the ever-increasing population of cane beetles, and pressure from the large and powerful sugar industry was growing. They were, at this point, willing to try just about anything. And in 1935, Montgomery would travel abroad to collect a little over 100 toads from Hawaii that would arrive back in Australia on the 22nd of June 1935. Initially, they were bred in captivity to expand their numbers, growing to more than 2,400 toads by mid-August of the same year. And at this point, you can begin to understand just how fucking fast these things breed. But even still, the toads were released on the 19th of August, and within another 2 months, the toad population was estimated to have expanded to roughly 24 times the size of the amount that was originally released. Concerns were immediately raised over the toad's explosive population growth and lack of natural predators, and Walter Froggatt managed to successfully lobby the Queensland government to ban additional releases of the toads.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more!
But this ban was short-lived, as the sugar industry was still convinced the toads were the solution to their problem, and successfully lobbied the government to remove the ban, and toads continued to be released across many different regions of the state of Queensland. It genuinely cannot be overstated how incredibly stupid the introduction of the cane toad was. The sheer level of incompetence on display from everyone involved is staggering. It's truly remarkable how little thought, planning, or care went into the whole thing. Those involved either just didn't give a fuck or were tremendously unqualified, or probably both. Reginald Montgomery genuinely couldn't have caused more damage if he wanted to. To begin with, the cane toads didn't even eat the fucking cane beetles they were brought in to control in the first place. The adult cane beetles sat high up on the sugarcane eating the leaves well out of the toad's reach, and the eggs and larvae were buried underground, meaning the toad couldn't get to those either. You would think that would be pretty fucking obvious, but apparently not. With the intended target of the cane toads being out of reach or just too difficult to bother with, cane toads instead turned their attention to the vast array of other insects, rodents, and plants that were more available to them. And it turned out the toads were very, very good at this. Capable of decimating local insect and rodent populations, they quickly began to outcompete native species for resources. And their incredible efficiency, fast reproductive cycle, and long lifespans meant the toads were able to quickly adapt to their new environment. Their thick hide and poison were also able to deter any predation of the toad by native species. And with no predators, the toad's population numbers were left unchecked. Almost immediately after their introduction, the cane toad population was out of control. And as more and more toads were born each generation, the only enemy the cane toads began to have was themselves. The regions they'd been introduced simply didn't have enough food to go around. And so the cane toads began to migrate, slowly spreading out in all directions in a search for more food. And as the toads' territory expanded, they rapidly adapted to the new environments they faced. The toads quickly began to grow larger. They developed longer legs for faster movement, and as they continued to expand through more and more territories, the rate of their migration only seemed to increase. And whenever the toads entered new regions, native species would inevitably attempt to prey upon the toads as they did with the local amphibians, and fall prey to the toad's powerful poison. This caused massive ecological damage to native species up and down the food chain, With their population numbers exploding into the hundreds of millions, few native species were able to compete with the cane toad's brutal efficiency. And as the toads continued to progress westwards, the extent of their damage only increased every year.
That's a lot of damage!
Despite the massive environmental damage that the cane toads were causing, the government at the time basically just wiped their hands of the matter.
You know what? That's your issue, not my problem.
And the general public weren't really made aware of the issues that the cane toads were causing until the 80s. Yes, the cool 80s this time. And in 1988, the documentary Cane Toads: An Unnatural History was released, and despite featuring a horrifying child on the box, managed to do extremely well, becoming the second most recognised Australian documentary after Mad Max. The documentary did a fantastic job of putting a spotlight on all the damage that the cane toads were causing, and Australians all across the nation briefly halted their beer drinking, cigarette smoking, and wife beating to demand that the government take action against these pests.
Mr. Prime Minister! Andy!
But this left the government with a problem. How exactly were they going to get rid of the cane toads? They had already spread out over huge amounts of land, and with how tough they were and how fast they reproduced, it was difficult enough to contain their expansion, let alone eliminate them. Still, the government did make a few attempts, but in the end, none of them were really able to make a dent in the toads' population. So I guess that makes two wars that the Australian government lost against animals. Seeing their government floundering, the people of Australia decided to take matters into their own hands. Volunteers across toad-infected areas began organising toad hunts, capturing any and all toads they came across. And while these hunts did have some impact on slowing the spread of the cane toad, it simply wasn't possible to get rid of them for good. A few politicians, however, did see the potential in this. Pauline Hanson, a woman who bears a striking resemblance to the cane toads, proposed rewards for turning them into the government, though experts have said that this isn't going to work. Another politician, Bob Catter, proposed arming children with rifles and sending them to hunt cane toads during the school holidays. No, I'm not making that up. Despite the best efforts of government and volunteers, most have now accepted that the cane toad is here to stay in Australia, and it seems like the people of Australia have one more poisonous animal to add to their vast collection. Hey, thanks for watching another one of my shitty videos. If you stuck around to the end, I really appreciate it. Sorry this one took way longer than planned, real life just kept getting in the way, but that should be sorted now. If you liked this video, check out my previous video on how the Domino's mascot the Noid drove a man insane. And if you want to see more shitty videos like this one, consider subscribing. Should be a new video every month or so at the very least.